There's a lot to be said about my dad, Dr. Willard Wheatley. But before I do that, I have a question. What manner of man was he? And I want to tell you something about that man. Of course, you know, he was born up in the East End area, and he became a school teacher at a very young age, a pupil teacher. He loved teaching and he stayed with it, and of course he became a principal of a school. He taught in Longlook School, and from there he went down to West End, and West End became his second home. He lived very close to a lady they called Miss Daly, and she provided food and that sort of thing for him. And he was like one of her children. And so over the years, he became very, very close to her children, Lavity Stout, Prince Stout, and all the others. They all lived very close together and so on. And my father was also a very fit person. He would, when there was difficulty coming from West End to East End on a weekend, you wouldn't believe it, but he would walk. He would walk from West End to East End. And periodically, he would walk from East End back to West End. He was a man of great stamina. What else was he? He was a musician. He could play any musical instrument. And of course, he was the organist in the church in East End. And he was also the choir master. I can't sing, neither can Shawande. I'm sorry. But he was a great singer. He was a great singer and that sort of thing. So that's the kind of person that he was, very focused. He could sail any boat, whether it was a sailboat, a big boat, or anything. You know, he could do that. He would take us to the sea to swim. And if you remember how East End was, there used to be a bar there, and you would go outside the bar, and he would take us there, and then he would say to us, I'm gonna take a little dive, you know? And we'd be there, and the man would be gone, and we are looking and wondering and worrying, and he'd blow up out yonder. I said, how you manage that? He said, boy, the lungs are good. The lungs are good. So that's the kind of man he was. I'm going to tell you another little story. Back in 1971, I was approached, you'd be surprised to hear this, and not many persons know this, by Dr. Osborne to run for a seat in the Legislative Council. And I went home and I had a word with my father, and I said, Dad, you know the story of the French woman who was having twins. And you know the French, they're very courteous and so forth. So the first child, on his way out, he said to the other child, you go first. You know, I give way to you, you go first. And the other one said, you go first. And they both ended up dying because they were so kind. So I told my father that story. And I said, Dad, Dr. Osborne wants me to run for politics. But when I think of the experiences that you have had as a school teacher in East End for all those years, as a local preacher, as a person who used to write deeds for persons in East End, Longlook, and so forth, I said, I think that you should go. And he said to me, I think you should go. And I said to him, but Dad, I am young. I have all the years ahead of me, but you are getting up there, so I think you should do it. And he thought about it, and he didn't run with Dr. Osborne. He ran as an independent, and the people of the 6th district embraced him. And of course, he won the seat. And you know how it was in those days? To have a majority government, you needed to have 4 persons. Not like now where you need 7, you only needed 4. And Dr. Osborne was only able to get 3 persons. And then there was the mad rush. We need a fourth person in order to have a majority government. And the people from East End, they said, boy, it got to be our man. You know how those stories go? Over the years, our man got to be that fourth person. And so they went and they negotiated with Dr. Osborne, and Dr. Osborne said, okay, he doesn't have any experience in politics, but we'll put him as the chief minister. And so they put him as the chief minister, and his other ministers were Oliver Sills of Seacoast Bay, and the same Dr. Osborne was his deputy, and then there was, I think, Mr. Henley, Honorable Henley. And so they started off with that government. As you would see from your little booklet here, it says that in 1971 there was recession, and things were really, really bad. And when my father went in government, he was sitting on an empty wool sack. There was no money. And one of the reasons, apart from the fact that there was a recession, was the fact that Wickham's Quay and Anegada had come to a standstill because the people had objected to it. And there were lots of persons who used to be employed there, doing the sand and the reclamation and so forth. And all that came to an end. And when that came to an end, there was no money in the BVI. And it was a very difficult time. I remember being in a meeting with the government people, and they were talking, how can we raise funds for the country? And somebody said, well, we write a lot of checks. Why don't we put a 10 cents charge on a check? Now, can you imagine that? But that is how desperate we were in those days, that we put a 10-cent charge on a check, to try to help the situation. And then every Friday afternoon, they would get together and they would tell all the different persons, you go to all of the income areas, where they pay taxes and they do all this, and bring it in, because if you don't bring it in, we can't pay people, we can't do anything. That's how desperate it was in the 1970s. And my father, he was very focused, and he decided that we are going to overcome this particular difficulty. And he said, the first thing we are going to do, we are going to cut back on expenditure. Only that which is necessary we will do. And the other thing we will do is try to increase the revenue. And so they set about that. And after a year, things didn't change much. And let me fast forward. I'm a talk show host. And one night I was talking about my father. I don't do that usually. And some of the things that he did. And a lady called in. And she said, he was no good. I remember everybody was out of work when he was the chief minister. Boy, he was no good at all. So there was a difficulty at one point, of course, because he was trying to get things organized and so forth. And but eventually he persisted. And he used to tell the people when he was running for office, you vote for me, and I will report to you. He made a point of that. And so ever so often, he would report to them in a long, lengthy speech about what was happening. And that's what we were doing in the 1970s. Another thing, oh, by the way, I was working in finance too. And it was, you had to account for every penny. It wasn't like in recent times. For example, when we had an SAP, it was like for $25,000. Later on, you hear about those things for $6 million. I could never understand that, 6 million and 10 million. And you had to, in those days, you had to account for every single penny. Yeah, you couldn't say, well, boy, don't worry about that. Mm-mm, mm-mm. You had to account for every penny. So I'm going to give you a little quiz. Oh, that's not allowed? I'll try it anyhow. I was listening to ZBVI the other day, and Dwight asked a question. What is the anniversary since the big march in 1949, the 20th of November? Now, I teach about these things all the time, and I said I can get a nice present or something here, and my phone wouldn't work. So I wasn't able to win anything. So I'm going to give you a little quiz. Do you know when and who they were a father and son served in the Executive Council of the BVI and also in the Legislative Council? Does anybody know the answer to that? Say again? A father and son served together at the same time in the Executive Council and in the Legislative Council. Okay, I'll give you the answer. Yes, yes. The reason it is both of us is that he was elected and I wasn't elected. But when I was serving in finance, I acted as financial secretary. And the financial secretary in those days was a member of the Executive Council and the Legislative Council. And also, of course, the Attorney General. And so it was that that's how we worked together. Yes. So I can't remember why I came up here, Ben. Yes, grant and aid. Yes. Well, let me talk a little bit about grant and aid. Yes. Yes, grant and aid. Do you know who started grant and aid in the BVI? Silence. There was a commissioner here called Cruikshank. And some people didn't like him because they said he wasn't a good man. But he was a good man. He was a very good man. And he saw the need for something like that in the BVI. And he was a brilliant. When you hear Mr. Howard Penn making a reference to Cruikshank, he says he was an Oxford man. A very learned man, very good. And he realized that the BVI needed some help at that time. And so very early in the 1950s, he wrote to what was then the Colonial Office and said to them that the BVI needs this kind of assistance right now to get off the ground. And the Colonial Office agreed, and that was how it started. And it served us well up to a point. But there came about a point when we didn't need it anymore. And we had to try to get rid of it. And that's the history about what we're talking about here tonight, right? Yeah. So, but we have to be thankful to Cruikshank for what he did because it fulfilled a need that we had at the time. But after that, we needed to get out of it. And my father was very focused on that. Now, I don't think I'm going to go into that right now. I believe that Ben is going to call me back here to talk some more. How we got out of it. Well, it was a hard fight, but he was determined. And he was the kind of person who said that he saw a light at the end of the tunnel. In every speech he would say that. And he really saw a light. And so he worked hard, doing both things. Reducing the expenditure, that is expenditure that was not really necessary. So he spent a lot of time working on that. And exploring revenue avenues. Tourism. Before I was in finance, I was the manager of tourism, traveling all over the world to get tourists to come here. And he even looked into the possibility of oil being found out to the north and see if that would help us and so forth. And diversification of the economy was what he was stressing. He was also stressing that you couldn't turn your back on agriculture, you couldn't turn your back on fisheries or anything like that. They were all needed to be developed to help the territory. And slowly but surely, we started reducing the dependence on granting aid, and he was forever in touch with London about this, and yes, so there was an office. The British had an office in Barbados called DevDiv, and we would have to go to DevDiv and discuss all these issues and so forth, or we'll send the estimates up to Barbados and so on. And so we were reducing the amount where it got to the point that we didn't need it anymore. But I'll read something here for you. Let me see if I can find it very quickly. There was a commission. A commission came out to look at the Legislative Council, and they drew up a plan for the Constitution. But my father and his staff, right, didn't like it. They didn't like what they had put down. And so they in turn prepared a document, and they sent that document to London. And they told London that these are the things that we want, not the things that the other persons said that we were going to have. And one of the things that was written on that was that finance should no longer be under the governor. It should now be under a minister. And they sent that resolution to London, and London approved it. And so that was the end of having the governor be responsible for finance. Yes. It was a great day. And when it happened, my father said, "This is our finest hour." And you know who said that before? Winston Churchill. When the Second World War started and the Germans attacked London, and the British had to fight back and fight very, very hard, because in those days Britain stood alone. The Americans had not come in at that time. They didn't come in until after the Japanese did their thing. So it was just Britain. And they were fighting, and those warplanes were coming over and bombing London and, you know, all the other places and so forth. And when the British Air Force was able to go up and shoot down those planes and win that battle, Churchill said it was our finest hour. And when my father brought us out of granting aid, if you look at any of the old newspapers going back to 1975, 76, he said it was our greatest hour.